Maggie La Tourelle. She's a healer, and she's been followed by Sarah, who's a consultant psychiatrist. I'll tell you just a little bit more about them. Although you've probably read it all already on here, but just for those of you who haven't or you've forgotten, Maggie is a healer, psychotherapist, and an author of this book here, The Gift of Alzheimer's, which she was telling us over dinner, has had a rave review from is it the social work, what's it called?
Professional social work.
Yes, recommending that all students and all tutors should read the book. And it has a very warm and positive message, and it's called A Heart and Soul Journey. This book will open up the world of dementia like never before. That's one of the reviews of it. And then we have someone here that some of you will already know, Dr. Sarah Eagger. She's been with Brahma Kumaris now for over 30 years, I think, something like that. And she's a consultant psychiatrist and also one of the pioneers of dealing with dementia, because she was involved in dementia work over 20 years ago. And she's done research on one of the first drug treatments for Alzheimer's back in the 80s, and pioneered groups for people with dementia, and has a special interest in the spiritual and holistic aspects of healthcare. And really, this is what we're going to be exploring. It's not going to be a medical discussion. It's going to be focusing on the spiritual aspects for both the person who has it and the people who care for those with dementia. So I'll hand over to both of you. Thank you.
Hello, Maggie. We were both saying that we're not used to this format because we're both used to giving talks or interviewing people, but we've never actually had a conversation. So it's a new experience for us, so you'll have to forgive us if we're feeling our way a bit with this as well. But I guess what occurred to me just sitting here and listening to various conversations is that I think people have come tonight because there's often a lot of fear around Alzheimer's, and the stuff in the newspapers and that is saying the rising tide, and so 1 in 5 of us is going to have dementia, and who's going to look after us, and are they going to abuse us, and the concern about lack of compassion and what's going to happen to us when we get old, but also for people who are being touched or are caring for someone in this situation, it's often very stressful. And reading your blog, the overall thing I got from message was this sense of moving from fear to love, and I found that a very powerful message.
Yes. Last week was Dying Awareness Week, so I wrote this blog specially for that, and especially in relation to Alzheimer's. I'm talking from personal experience. My mother had Alzheimer's, and my sister had already died, so I was the only person who was able to offer her the sort of support that she needed. My father was alive, but he was in his 90s and struggling too. It seems to me that as the Alzheimer's is a neurological disease, and the brain function slows down, and parts of the brain don't work very well, and the neural networks aren't joined up in the way they should be, so everything seems quite chaotic. But when that happens, and this is my hypothesis, my understanding is that as everything slows down, people have time to be in a different state. And also the structures that have held everything in place that help us to know who we are, they go too, so that people lose their sense of identity, and that's often seen as a loss. And they lose their ego. But if you think about it, if you don't have an ego anymore, and you've slowed down and there's only now. Being in the now, with no ego, is an altered state of consciousness. And I would say that given the right conditions, that the person can actually experience a transcendental state, and that Alzheimer's allows that to happen. So, on the one hand, there's loss of the personality and loss of this and loss of that. On the other hand, it seems to me the real person is able to be. And when somebody is in a transcendental state, or that altered state of consciousness, and they're being held, then certainly my mother's experience was no fear. She said, I have no fear, I have no worries. Death is nothing to be afraid of. These were her words. And I took great comfort from that, and I also was so pleased that, that she was feeling like that.
I mean, when I was reading your blog, it struck me that there were parallels with our stories.
Yeah.
Because you were saying that your mum wasn't an easy person to live with when you were growing up, and she also had a mental illness, and partly you escaped Scotland and the family home because she really couldn't stand it anymore.
That's right.
And yet, as your mother developed dementia and you as her daughter had to connect with her, you found that relationship changing and becoming different. And it was similar with my mum. She was not an easy person to have as my mother, very difficult. And yet, I think for me, the journey of allowing the love to come out in that relationship. She also had dementia and Parkinson's disease. She was in Australia. But I remember the last time I saw her, when she was moving into a nursing home, and when we said goodbye, and it was interesting, I thought, because you don't often say that, and I said, because when you're visiting someone in Australia, no goodbye could be goodbye forever, and I said, goodbye Mum, I said, I really love you, and she said, I really love you too, dear, and then she said, and you tried so hard, which was a big thing for her to say, and an acknowledgement of somehow there wasn't any burden left in that relationship. So I think we both felt that if we didn't see each other again, we had expressed that. We'd got there. And that's what I said. I said, it took us a long time, but we got there in the end. And it seemed like a similar thing happened with you and your mum, that process allowed love to come through.
It did. I actually think that Alzheimer's facilitates that. Not in all cases of dementia, and I want to ask you about that in a minute. But Alzheimer's, from what I've read since my mother passed away, is that people with Alzheimer's, as the brain, cognitive part of the brain becomes less active, the part of the brain that deals with empathy becomes more active, and the more cognitive skills fail, the more empathy the person experiences. And that means that, and also when they feel this empathy, they also mimic what they are feeling and feed that back. I don't know if you've had experience of that.
I've certainly had experience of that. I think, as we were saying earlier, I've visited nursing homes, continuing care nursing homes, for years. So I've seen the same people sort of week in, week out. And what kind of conversation, often they can't talk to you. There's no conversation. But I'm very aware of entering into that building and entering into my connection with that soul in a certain state of mind, so that they're like, it is a bit like a baby, I suppose, in the sense that the brain isn't working very well anymore, and like with a baby, I guess their brain's not developed, so you have a sense of a pure soul kind of energy which you can connect with, and it is with a vibration. It's a subtle kind of thing of actually going in and really connecting with that soul rather than what looks like an old decrepit or whatever. You're not really interested in the body somehow. You're interested in connecting with the spirit inside that body, and that all sorts of things can come out when you're connecting with that energy. Some remarkable interactions.
Yes, I had that experience too. My mother, she had been a dancer, so she loved movement and she loved Debussy, and I used to play Claire de Lune and dance around the room for her. And we got into a symbiotic relationship in which we just seemed to know what each other was thinking. And I used to quite frequently just sit quietly and just be with her and imagine her energy, her soul just radiating. And she once said to me, Margaret, that's my Scottish name, said, Margaret is here, there, and adjoining. Our energies are connected. And this is somebody who'd had Alzheimer's for 6 years. And she knew without any words having been spoken. Fortunately, she retained her ability to speak, so she was able to communicate what she was experiencing to me. So I was very fortunate. But I also wonder, and you might be able to answer this question, we kept communicating. We kept communicating in ways that were meaningful to her. So, whatever her experience was, I validated that because I knew it was real for her, even if I didn't understand it. And this enabled us to keep going on our journey together, and me often kind of moving onto her map and trying to imagine and asking her, what's it like being you? I really want to understand. And then she would tell me, and I'm wondering what you have to say about that.
Well, I think one of the difficulties with your brain's not working properly anymore is you're often always getting things wrong. So you're always being corrected that you've said the wrong word, or you've forgotten this, or you've got lost, or you can't do this and you can't do that. And I think it's a very invalidating illness, which is the difficulty of it. And so it sounds like what you're doing is really connecting with the bits that are still functioning. And I think that the essence of the person and their ability to connect or to be loving, sometimes they're very difficult. They're the ones I often used to have to deal with, the ones that no one could manage and they want me to do something. But I would find there was usually some way of connecting with them, something that was bothering them, that you really needed to make the effort to enter into their world to figure out what that was, if at all possible. And I think, caring for people with dementia is not an easy task at all. I think it stretches all of us and our creativity and our humanity to do it, especially day in, day out. But I think it's that finding those connections. And I mean, I thought it was a fascinating process you talked about I know you're a psychotherapist as well, but you were talking about helping your mum unburden herself. Yeah. You were kind of doing psychotherapy in an unconventional way. I'm very curious about that, because you said you kind of you felt you were helping her get to a place where she could die peacefully and lose some of her baggage. So what was that about?
Well, when people have Alzheimer's and generally towards the end of life, like Carl Jung said something like
I've got your quote.
Material from repressed material surfaces in a state of diminished consciousness.
Yeah. The personal unconscious in which forgot is that which is forgotten or repressed.
Yes, that's it.
Material surfaces in a state of diminished consciousness.
Thank you, Sarah.
I don't know, maybe you could translate that. What does that mean?
Well, it means that the filters that normally keep everything well locked up, they're no longer operating. So whereas, I might have a thought, and then I will monitor that thought through a filtering process and then say what people might expect me to say. People with Alzheimer's say it, and that's my experience. And also, people with Alzheimer's, they may not remember what they've just said, but their emotional memory goes on. And Professor Turnbull of Bangalore University, I don't know if you come across his work, but he's done some research into this and found that emotional memory continues right to the end. So that means when the filters have gone, anything from the past can come up, and repressed material which has not been dealt with is likely to surface. And what do you do when it does? Well, being a psychotherapist and also being a seeker of consciousness, I really wanted my mother to pass on unburdened, and that was my sort of aim. That's what I was working towards. So she had 3 life reviews in this life before she passed on, and she said, I'm remembering all my life, all the people, all the difficult times, hobbled feet, which is what they do to horses to stop them from, galloping off. Lots of repressed, difficult memories came up, and I didn't want her to I didn't dismiss them because they were valid for her. The way that I dealt with that was very simple, actually, and it seemed to be sufficient to put her mind at rest. Because I knew her personal circumstances and that she suffered from mental instability and depression all her life, I knew, and being in a family, I had first-hand experience of it. But what's I say about that? I would say to her, we all make the best choices we can at the time, given the resources we have. If we could have done something better, we would have done. And it's easy in retrospect to say, I wouldn't do that. That's in retrospect, knowing what we know now. But at the time, people make the best choices they can, and that's a very forgiving way of helping people to forgive themselves and reassure them that you believe that and you want them to really take that on board. And she did, like that, it's like, as soon as I'd said that, she could smile and we moved on. And the next life review.
We were also talking about what we thought the person was, because you were saying that your mum she wasn't necessarily a overtly spiritual person when you were younger, but she started saying these things which were quite profound, and you felt she was channeling some sort of wisdom. And we were talking about what we felt the person was. Were they the brain, or where's that personality lying? Where are those memories? Where is that sense of identity? You talked about non-local mind, and I said to you, what
non-locality of mind?
What do you mean by that? Yes.
Well,
and what do you think she was channeling? Because you're into energies and stuff as well.
Yes. Non-locality of mind is a term that's used by Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about morphic fields. Some of you may be familiar with his work. And his research suggests that the mind is not located in the brain, but it's actually somewhere else. And certainly, I might have had some questions around that before, but I don't now. My mother started to say things that made me think she was channeling information, because there was no, she wouldn't have said these things before, and she became incredibly psychic. She could tell me all the things I've been doing. I could give you examples of that. So I knew it. I knew it was true. It was true, because, for example, on one occasion, I was in London. I was going up to Scotland to see her the following day, and a friend said to me, "Where are you going?" And I went on to Google Maps, zoomed in on our house, and there was the house and my mother's mini car sitting in the driveway. Well, she hadn't had the car for years. I went up to Scotland the next day, sat down with her, and she said, "My mini." But I could give you endless examples where she was just tuning in. But then she started to tune in at a much more profound level. And she had a precognitive dream about her own death. And she said, "Peace and quiet. It's complete." She left her body, she told me, because I had little chats with her about astral travel, and that it was all right to do that because I suspected that she was doing that. And she said, "My brother, who was deceased, asked me to visit him, and I did." So where is all this happening? I don't know, but she did say some very profound things. She said, "We're learning we're immortal. Death is nothing to be afraid of." The stillness of deep love. I can't find words to describe it. These were things she said. Now the stillness of deep love is such a beautiful thing to say, and she said it with such meaning. Where was that coming from?
I think, as John said, I've been meditating for a long time, but I think one of the most profound understandings that I achieved or got from the meditation here was this sense that you often talk about my spirit or my soul or something like that, but this kind of deep realization that not that I have a soul, but I am a soul.
Yeah.
And if you really get that you're a soul and everyone else is a soul, that soul is not of the material world, but it's the soul that's experiencing. It's the soul that uses the brain in order to see, to use language, to do all the things that the brain does. It translates that soul energy into the material world, but it's not of it. And the practice of meditation is that which takes you back into that silence and that stillness, and that your true essence of love and peace. And so I think for me, just that practice enabled me to connect soul to soul with I'd say my patients or the people in front of me, regardless of how their brain was, what state their brain was in. And your mum sounds like an exceptional person in the sense I can't remember many of my patients saying such profound things, but some of them did say some pretty amazing things. I was looking through I cleaned up my office and I found this card from one of my patients from 20 years ago, and he was a physicist, and he signed his cards, love from whatever, brain cells 10 to the 6 and counting down. And I thought, but that's the kind of humour that some of them have, and insight into what's going on. But I think that ability to connect soul to soul and to understand that if you really experience yourself as a soul, that even if your brain isn't working properly, you're okay.
Absolutely.
And we're all going to die, and in some way or another. But I think the emphasis now is on the quality of living. And that's something I struggle with a bit, actually, because I did see in these nursing homes people who are kept alive now because of antibiotics and all the medical treatment they can have. They can't speak anymore, they can't walk, they have to be fed, they have to be bathed, everything. And, so where's the quality of life for people who are kept alive in that way? It's not easy to see that, but and so like in my mother's case, there was a sense that she had been going downhill, but then she had a little stroke and she couldn't swallow, and we decided not to give intravenous feeding and all this, and she went very quickly then, and we all felt that was a blessing, a sense of, well, let the soul go free, don't hold them in this body, because it isn't anything to be afraid of.
I think my mother was so enjoying our journey, because she and I had never had a close relationship like this. She said we had a difficult beginning, but we've had a good ending, which is similar to you. And she and I used to sit in silence and look at each other. And this was partly because of her Alzheimer's. People with Alzheimer's tend to fixate, they might look at their hand for ages, or she'd look at my teeth or my hair, but often she looked at my eyes. And I decided to stay with it, which became increasingly difficult, because the more her Alzheimer's progressed, the longer these, looking at each other would be. And I felt totally transparent, because I knew she was psychic. I knew she could read everything. She said, I can tell everything through the eyes. And so this was it was a huge learning for me, because in order to stay in that place of absolute stillness with her was I don't like to use the word demanding, because that's not quite right, but
discipline.
It was a discipline. And she said, call me the cleanser.
Oh.
Yeah. There was another word she used too. I can't remember now, but call me the cleanser, and that's exactly what it felt like. I felt cleansed, sitting there, staying. I used to think I need to escape, can't. And then I would say, well, what am I trying to run away from? And she said to me, what's stopping you? And she was aware of my discomfort at times as I tried to maintain this state of it seemed like indefinite, eternal stillness, which was a very good training for me.
So as she was kind of getting closer to her death, she was teaching you about dying.
Yes, she was my teacher. I'm the messenger.
So when we talk about, when you've written a whole book on the gifts of Alzheimer's, so what have you said those gifts were? So there was the gift of love, that was the big biggie.
Love is absolutely the core of everything. And when somebody is old and frail with Alzheimer's, it's hard to imagine being with them and not feeling compassion. It's natural to feel compassion when somebody is in that state, and along with compassion goes love. And it becomes a two-way process. So my mother said, love is what it is. I thought it can't get much clearer than that. I think there is a gift in losing all these filters that keep us separate. Our filters keep us as individuals separate. And I think there is a gift in losing the filters and being able to engage directly in the way that people with Alzheimer's can.
So you're communing spirit to spirit.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, and you can do that.
I think we've already talked about this, about losing the fear of death. I have no fear, I have no worries. Death is nothing to be afraid of. We're learning we're immortal. If you don't fear death, you can really live.
Yes.
And I think our society has become so divorced from death. It's become so sort of hand it over to the professionals to do it. I have no disrespect. You know what I mean? People.
Just to clarify, I don't go around.
People have become divorced from the process of dying. Alzheimer's is an opportunity to engage in conscious dying. And this was brought over, I think, to America in the 70s and gained some popularity here. But on the whole, I think people do separate themselves from death. And when you don't understand it and you're not connected, you have fear when you're not connected. But if you're connected, then there's no fear. And I was with my mother when she was dying, and I had no fear because I knew that she already knew how it was going to be and had told me. And she said, love never dies. And that's true. Love is an energy, the energy of the universe that lives on.
I mean, it is interesting. I would also like to hear if there are any more gifts you want to add to that list. But I was just remembering a lady who had young onset dementia. So she came into the nursing home quite young, in her 50s, and is now bedbound. And they thought she was dying, and they put in the palliative care team and everything. But then she rallied, and she's sort of still with us. But it's very interesting to see souls in that state, and I've seen quite a few, whereas they're kind of alert, and you can sense that they're feeling the energy in the room, and they're feeling your energy, and they're very subtle signs of how you're approaching them, or how loud something is, or whatever, and just how you need to have that sensitivity to the, like maybe like a baby, that they're picking up on your vibration and what energy you're giving off. And so it makes you very conscious of how you're treading, in their sense, in their space.
Very much so, and you know, that this links in with empathy, which people near the end of life and with Alzheimer's experience more and more. So they are very, very tuned in to how we're feeling. Probably more tuned in to how we're feeling than we know ourselves. And at another energetic level, my mother and also other people near the end of life, sometimes they are sensitive to energies that we can't see. And I've been with a few people at the end of life who have clearly, in my sister too, this happened with her, and suddenly they become sort of awake and lean forward, lean forward, reaching out for something, and I could see her gaze was absolutely focused, and she was reaching out. And then she said, "That was lovely, that was absolutely lovely." And I thought, well, only I've been able to see that too. But it's good to know that maybe there are things that in our growth state we are not able to tune into, but people who are in a state of physical decline at the end of life are more able to tune into these things.
So that you would see as a gift too, the gift of
Yes.
sort of sensitivity.
Yeah.
And any other gifts on your list before we open it out?
Personally, it's changed my life. It was a huge gift because it was also very therapeutic. You know, I thought I had done the work around my mother, but actually there was a whole other layer which was a gift for me to work through that. And she's given us all a gift. I recorded our conversations for 3.5 years. Didn't know it was going to be 3.5 years, or I mightn't have started, but I then edited these conversations because she said, you must tell others. So I was entrusted with the task of being her faithful scribe and giving this information to others. I didn't intend to write a book. I didn't start off doing that, but when she said you must tell others, I thought, well, better keep writing all this down. And so my mother has shown us, she had the gift of speech to the end of her life, so she was able to describe what it was like for her.
That would be unusual.
It is quite unusual. And also to give us some insights into the soul consciousness which she was experiencing in her life. And as I say, I was the messenger. I was the scribe writing it down, and the messenger who is, you know, putting it out there for others to learn and have some reassurance about this process that it's not all bad. You know, it's like in some ways it's quite wonderful.
You said it became easier towards the end, like the earlier stages were harder, but it helped you to understand there were different stages.
Yes. I mean, anybody who's been with Alzheimer's from the beginning will know that it is difficult. Very, you know, my mother was difficult. She probably had Alzheimer's before we even realized it, but her behavior was often quite erratic, so we didn't know. And, you know, you can't tell somebody, you shouldn't tell somebody, don't do that or that's wrong. You know, she had opened tins of things, food to put in the cat's dish. And I thought, what's she doing that? But it was because it was tin food and the cat had tin food. You know, she hadn't made the dish. But it's very difficult at the beginning. The early to moderate mild stages of Alzheimer's, I think, are difficult. And then when people have kind of reached a state of surrender, when they're no longer battling to maintain their independence and prove that they're independent in the world, that's when most people give up. You know, most friends and family give up. They think, oh, we've lost her, or we've lost him. I say that's just the beginning. That's when it really gets interesting. I forgot to say one of the most interesting things. What alerted me at the beginning was I've been channeling some energy to her, and she was feeding that back to me about her energy. And then she said, it's difficult being, and then she corrected herself and said, living between two worlds. Now, a regular, not you, but lots of medical doctors would have said, well, of course, it's a hallucination, it's delusional. But with my background, I thought, two worlds, this is really interesting. I want to find out more about this. So if I hadn't had that interest, that would have been the end of the story. There would have been no more. She would have closed down. So I really want to encourage people to be explorers, you know, with people with Alzheimer's, to really try and find out what they mean. You know, I said to her, you know, tell me more about the, you know, these two worlds.
I know with friends of mine who have had cancer and are dying, that it's been an extraordinary privilege to practice or to kind of do a rehearsal for dying or leaving the body, like doing a meditation consciously with them. And I remember a couple of people where every day we would, when we knew it was getting near the end, we would practice the journey of going to the next world and coming back. And I think you're right. One of the challenges with all these things is, you have to sit with a lot of stuff in yourself. So you can't sit with someone who's dying unless you've really thought about your own death and what does that mean, and faced it and gone. And so all the work of being with people in whatever state they're in is also work for ourselves, and that is a gift.
Absolutely.
In what it makes us look at and discover in ourselves, and the uncomfortable bits and stuff.
Yeah.
Interesting so far, but I think it will get even richer and deeper when we get some questions from you. So is anyone who would like to ask a question? Shall I put your hands up and then, yeah?
Hi, it's Maggie, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story you shared, and it's not really a question. It's just coming into the conversation, really. It's your journey with your mother is like an incredibly rich journey, and maybe someone who's like sorry, I forgot your name. Sarah, who's had to do it more in a sort of work sort of place, is much more of a challenging situation. And I think the way you're a healer and the way you turned up in your being, and your being as a soul, which was maybe incredibly useful and helpful for your mother, and you and your mother sort of being in a vulnerable state allows her to sort of be much more free, lose some of her, just lose some of that ego state, as well as the Alzheimer's. The Alzheimer's, I don't know what the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia is, but maybe that's the question as well. Mm-hmm. But I can probably find out myself. But I think your journey has been much more difficult and challenging, because I often think how we turn up with our being is how someone else will turn up with their being. So you seem like an incredible person. So when your being really allowed her to have her being, and that being of like really just being, and that being is love, peace, compassion, all that's being in that soul world, that soul to soul. And it's a really beautiful story you shared, but I know for so many other people it's like a really challenging, it's a really challenging situation, and having that gift and that time and that patience and that love that you were able to share is like what other people need to take into that sort of care situation, where a lot of people are just caring, a lot of people are just working with these people. Your journey was really, beautiful in the way it was shared, and that patience and that love you gave, that gave her that being, I think, and it's really lovely to hear. But maybe you could just say a little bit about what the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia is.
Dementia really just means your brain's not working properly. I mean, it's a very generic term, and there are many different causes for your brain not working properly. I think you quote over 100 different, but Alzheimer's is one of the major causes of your brain not working properly. But poor circulation is another one. There are some inherited diseases that stop it, some with Parkinson's, sometimes doesn't work with HIV, some infections. So there are many, many reasons why your brain's not working, which is really all that dementia means. The most common one is Alzheimer's.
You both talked a lot about the aspect of death, but when we talk about life and someone living with Alzheimer's, what is the most practical way in which you can read the energies of the person suffering from Alzheimer's and then try to sort of emerge the sweetness of that relationship? I mean, obviously my experience with meditation is to enjoy the concept of silence and the relationship of silence. So for me, that's been easier with, like my mother, who's obviously on that journey. The fact of having that appreciation of silence. But are there any other sort of practical ways in which you can sort of draw up a plan in which to emerge that sweetness?
I think that slideshow was a good stimulator. I think, this is the challenge in any nursing home, in any continuing care home. What are the activities that are meaningful for people whose brains are working differently to how they used to? And I think music is really important, touch is really important, smells are really important, the emotional memories. So I think it demands a lot of creativity. What's the saddest thing to see is when you go into a home and people are just all sat in front of the telly, which unfortunately I suppose happens with children too. The television has become the babysitter and the carer, and that's okay. A bit of telly's okay. We all enjoy that, but I think homes that you go into where there's some real thought about what makes a meaningful activity for people, and it may. I think this is sort of what the validation therapy and things do, is to know something about that person. And for someone who is a housewife, just folding towels and making it a nice pile might be very satisfying for them. Maybe something as simple as that, or doing something in the kitchen, but something that was meaningful to them.
Yes, creativity. People who have Alzheimer's are naturally creative, because the filters that keep us separate from engaging are gone. So they engage very fully. They really appreciate poetry, because poetry is rich in meaning. It's about connecting with them in a meaningful way. So poetry, music, singing, art. They can see art in new and different ways. They can be very stimulated by that. And I think this is where family and friends can play a really important role, as you say, in helping the care home staff and the activity workers say, well, my mum or my aunt, she just loved sewing, or she wasn't able to sew then, or she loved music, or she loved singing. Then if the person has the opportunity to express themselves creatively, that's a huge gift for them.
I think one of those slides was great, wasn't it? It was a lady who sort of had curlers in her hair and she's backing and dropping. Yes. Really got a sense of some internal process she was going through.
So even though the dynamics of your relationship will change, you can still experience the same happiness, maybe a different sort of happiness.
I'd say more. I had more happiness. But that stillness that you mentioned is really important. And tuning in to the person, so that you are... I'll give you an example of me not tuning in. When I rushed up from London, rushed into the care home, I was still buzzing. And my mother would say to me, "You're rushing." And she was absolutely right. So somebody else might have thought she's rushing, but wouldn't have said it, but she told me. And that was a good reminder. And it often took me a day to kind of wind down and just start to be more quiet in myself. And then notice what pace she was speaking at, what pace she was doing things at, and sort of tune into that pace. In fact, it was like going for a walk with her in a wheelchair. It was like a meditation. We would stop, look at the roses, speak to the children. It was lovely.
How does the medication aspect come into it? How does it interact with the actual disease?
Sorry, the what aspect?
Medication.
Medication. Well, I guess it depends what medication you're talking about. Did you have something in mind in particular?
Whatever they give people with Alzheimer's to alleviate, or I know there isn't a cure yet, although they're talking about coconut a lot, coconut oil.
Well, it's a very big question, but I think because the brain's not working properly and the neurotransmitters are not in balance, then you get kind of odd things happening, and the medication is trying in a fairly crude way to try and balance it back up a bit. But in fact what's happening is that some of the main neurotransmitters, especially for like memory, are not being made. There's not enough of them, so it's getting less and less. So there are some kind of drugs, the kind of what they call anti-dementia drugs, which stop those neurotransmitters being broken down, so there's more available, and that works for a while, but it's not a cure. It's just boosting it for a while. And then if other things happen, like people with dementia can get very depressed because that neurotransmitter which keeps your mood up can also get depleted, so they might need antidepressants which then cheer them up, for a while, or they might get very distressed, so they need some sort of sedative. So you have to really tailor it according to, what's happening. And I think the boombox as well, the vibration is but I think what people are realising now is that it's very important just to use the smallest dose that's needed and stop it once it's not needed, and not just give too much and zone people out, and because they need their what their brain cells, that they have to be working as good as they can. So you have to use medication judiciously and not overdo it, and review it.
Sorry, Cam, if you want more information, it'd be good to ask Sarah afterwards. It's not medical consultation as such, it's more a spiritual exploration, which is, other more technical questions about dementia maybe can be, dealt with afterwards. So this gentleman has been waiting a while.
I'd just like to thank both of you, first of all, for going on the journey and embracing the journey, because I know I'm coming from the outside. I was invited by a friend today, so I don't have any personal experience with Alzheimer's, and it's fascinating to hear your insights. I've got two questions, one for both of you and the second one specifically for Maggie. But firstly, the fear of the person going through Alzheimer's, did your mothers or your patients express much fear in themselves? Are they frightened from the experience? And the second question is to Maggie. Was your mum spiritual before Alzheimer's? And presumably, I'm presuming you were as well. And how much of that played a role?
Shall I answer that question first? While it's fresh in my mind, in case I forget. My mother wasn't spiritual before. She, Scotland, the Church of Scotland, she had no time for it. She found it quite hypocritical. But she was a free spirit, and she was a very independently minded person. So I think that was helpful. I think because my spiritual journey began more in earnest, in a more kind of structured way, in my mid-20s. So I'd been on a long journey. I was carrying, a lot of knowledge and information about spirituality, and I think that I was able to hold the space safely for her, and she intuitively knew that, which meant that she could let go and go off and come back and tell me. And the more I validated what she told me, the more she told me. So I think that was we're all spiritual beings. It's just a matter of remembering that and stopping to connect with that. And Alzheimer's let you stop and connect. And to answer your first question, and then Sarah can answer it. She suffered from some anxiety when she first went into the care home. She was thinking, I should be doing something. You know, she'd been used to being busy all her life. You know, who's looking after the house? So there was that kind of surface level of anxiety. But the staff were very caring. We were so fortunate that she was in a care home where the staff were genuinely loving and caring. And she just loved that. I think she felt more loved and cared for in the care home than she'd ever felt. As, you know, she wasn't an easy person, and her marriage was not easy either. And I was pretty hard on her. I regret that now, but you know, that's how it was. So she's in a care home, and everybody adores her, and her daughter is adoring her too. So she, surrounded by love, she felt no fear. Where there is love, there's no fear.
Yeah, I think people are afraid. I've certainly seen many people afraid. And I remember, again, when my mum first went into the nursing home and I was helping her, and she was having a rest in the afternoon, and she was sleeping, so I thought it's a good chance I'll go back to my sister's and have my supper and then come back. And when I came back, she was in a complete state. She was just like a child who'd been abandoned. She was saying, how could you have left me? Don't ever do that. She just worked herself up into a frenzy. And it was this, so I could see it was fear, you know, some fear of being alone. And you know, I think people, whatever disease you've got, whether you've got cancer or Alzheimer's, or you know something's, you know, normally we think, okay, I've got this, I'm going to get over it. But when you kind of dawns on you, actually, this isn't going away. You know, I'm going to live with this or die with it. And then what does that mean? So I think facing that realization and the fear that, of course, if you don't know you're a soul and you don't really have, it's not even knowledge in a way, it's an experience. You need to experience it to know that you're going to be okay. But I think as a doctor, one of the things I was most grateful for, and I've had these conversations with people who are suicidal and all that, is I can say, honestly, with conviction myself, I can say to people, whatever happens, you're going to be okay. And I really mean it. And I think they've picked that up. That, you know, if you don't have fear, I mean, other people might say, well, we don't know what's going to happen and all that, but I think you could say, I think that's the job of healthcare professionals in a way, isn't it, to give hope and, you know, say, well, you'll die, but you'll be pain-free, we'll look after that. You know, I don't know if you can make any of these promises, but I know that even when you're leaving the body, that when you've gone through the process of death, you'll be okay.